As a black Muslim woman, some may say I have all the cards stacked against me, and whilst it certainly felt that way on a number of occasions growing up, I now realise I've been put in a unique position to help change the narrative. My footballing journey began at the age of 11, and it didn't take me long to realise that there weren't a lot of girls that looked like me playing. This made me feel like an outsider, and as though I didn't belong. That the sport I loved more than anything, maybe it just wasn't for me. A mixture of my love of the game and my stubbornness meant that I kept playing anyways. But there's a lot of girls that drop out from this same feeling. At my first club, Larkspur, I had a coach called Katie. She was one of the only female coaches I had at the time, and whilst I didn't know how big of an influence she would have on me down the line, what I did know was how special it felt having a female coach, how much more I felt I could relate to her, and how much she inspired me. At the time, I had absolutely no plans of becoming a coach, but as I grew older, I began to think more of how much I really wanted to see someone that looked like me involved in football, and it started to feel like I had a responsibility to be that role model for the young girls of today. Looking back now, I realise how big of an influence Katie had on me believing that I could go into coaching. She made me see that in an industry full of men, there is space for women to thrive. It's like they say, if you can see it, you can be it. And Katie certainly made me believe that I could be it. I was very lucky to have had Katie, because when I was growing up, there weren't very many people I could look up to as a role model. No matter how much fun I had playing, or how good things were, the feeling of belongingness was what I always felt I lacked in football. Being the only Muslim girl on most of the teams I played for meant that dropping out was unfortunately something I thought of quite often. At the time, my parents also had their reservations about me playing, which only made it all the more difficult. Back then, I never really understood why they were so against me playing, and this often meant a lot of arguments and even more occasions of me sneaking out of the house to play, playing every single game as though it was my last, because I genuinely believed it would be. As I've grown up, my parents have become more accepting and supportive of me playing, but there was never really a discussion as to why or how their opinion shifted. To be honest, I never really thought to question it, out of fear it would remind them and they'd change their minds again. But I was speaking as part of a panel for an event one day, with my dad in the audience, when I got asked if my parents supported me playing football and how this affected me growing up. I looked to my dad and smiled, thinking there was no way I could throw him under the bus, even though I had plenty of stories I could have shared. But I said my parents were always really supportive of me playing as a child, which couldn't have been further from the truth. On our way back home from that event, my dad asked me why I lied. I was silent, not knowing what way this conversation was going to go. He ended up asking me if I knew why they were so against me playing. I said no. I never really thought about that. I was too busy thinking about how I'd sneak out of the house next. He told me it was out of fear of how I would be treated. He knew how harsh it could be for me as a visible Muslim female playing football. He knew it wasn't something a lot of Muslim girls do, and so he thought I wouldn't be supported. But as I grew older, he saw how passionate and stubborn I was, and had every belief that I would be alright. Looking back now, it's such a sad thought that they had to worry about whether I'd be discriminated against, and they had every reason to worry. Stereotypes and a lack of understanding mean I'm more likely, and have unfortunately, been discriminated against. It's the reason why I actively try and do everything I can to create change, so that the next generation don't have to experience what I, and unfortunately many others, have had to. Whether that be through coaching and playing, where I can be a visual representation, or speaking at events and getting my story out there to highlight my experiences. Whilst I'm a firm believer of being and creating the change you want to see, instead of waiting for someone else to do it, I can only reach a limited number of people. This is where different forms of media such as TV and films, play a huge role. Children base a lot of their assumptions about themselves as well as others on the content that they watch, and whilst this can have a very positive impact by increasing their self-esteem and promoting positive messages, it can also have a negative impact. Children's media has certainly diversified over the years, however it's still not where it could be or where it should be. Due to this lack of diversity and representation, there's been a shift from traditional TV to platforms such as YouTube. A key reason for this shift is because YouTube is a platform that gives individuals the freedom to create the content that's lacking in traditional TV shows. Young people can now easily access the content that they feel best represents them. As we often see, traditional media can perpetuate stereotypes and the negative portrayal of underrepresented backgrounds. Examples of this include the portrayal of Muslim women as oppressed and the angry black woman narrative. These negative and inaccurate portrayals fuel stereotypes and the discrimination of these groups. It's also important to remember that the lack of representation can have just as negative an effect on groups as inaccurate portrayal. If young people aren't seeing themselves in their favourite TV shows, or in TV shows full stop, they begin to feel invisible and unimportant. In the words of the brilliant Viola Davis, if they exist in life, then we should see it in TV, and accurately portrayed, might I add. It's time now to take a deeper look and ask the important questions of am I doing enough, and are we doing enough to ensure that we're not adding fuel to the fire and that we aren't sitting around doing nothing. The time for excuses has long passed.